The million dollar question: how do entrepreneurs transition from self-employed to owning a business that turns a profit? My name is Chris Waters, and this podcast has the million dollar answer. Welcome to CEO Secrets. Hey, Keegan.
Chris, what's going on, man?
Hey, welcome to CEO Secrets.
Yeah, I'm glad. Thanks for having me.
For anybody listening to this right now, nobody watches this on YouTube. Everybody goes to iTunes, but if you guys want to see our pretty faces, go to YouTube if you want to see us on video.
Yeah, there we go. Well, good. I'm glad I wore my special makeup today.
Keegan, as I was looking at your academic background, I'm like, of course this guy's on the Inc. 500 list.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's been a unique journey to get here for sure. And, first, thanks, Chris, for reaching out. I appreciate you reaching out and asking me to do the podcast with you. I'm excited to, hopefully add some value for your listeners and to discuss a little bit about what I do today and how we've gotten where we are. Actually, this morning, I've already done 3 podcasts today.
Wow.
I know, it was intense. And so this is literally my 4th podcast. I recorded 3 podcasts this morning with Dan Sullivan, who's a prolific author, any Barnes and Nobles or whatever you walk
nice.
in.
Yeah.
All over the business section and
amazing.
Does some entrepreneurial coaching and things like that. And then, equally excited to be on yours today. And so
I'm a low man on the totem pole. To that.
But yeah, it's it really has been a wonderful journey.
While we're on the topic of podcasts, so you ended up at number 349.
Yep.
In 2021, 557% growth over a 3-year period. You mentioned podcasts.
It's actually so in 2021, I guess 2020 was the first year we were on the list, and we were like number 215, and that was 2,020% growth over 3 years. And then last year, 2021, it was 1,363% growth. And we were like number 343, 363, something like that.
I've got 349 on here and 215.
That sounds
215 in 2020. So you mentioned podcasts and you've done 4 today. Has that been one of the secrets, doing podcasts with influencers and big followings to build up your sales revenue?
Not to date. It has not been, but
what was the juice?
Not specifically, but to answer your question, I think it's a really useful tool. And one of the key things that I knew out of the gate when it was just me, a one-person shop, right, with really not exactly sure where I was headed, was that people couldn't hire me if they didn't know who I was, right? So leveraging any outlet where I could give a talk, where I could take advantage of some online presence to reach as many people as possible, that we took advantage of that. And it's actually a little bit odd that I haven't taken advantage of podcasts to the full extent that I should have. And no doubt that's probably in the future for us. But I do think it's something that we would want to leverage, and because it was just like a basic principle that I knew that people couldn't hire us if they didn't know who we were. And there's a million other law firms out there, and several of which have been around for 150 years.
Yeah, so you're a patent attorney, or you started a business for intellectual.
Yeah, I'm a patent attorney and own the fastest growing law firm in the United States. And
you're in the UK, you're in Santa Monica, Boston. I mean, you've got a bachelor's in biomedical science, Ph.D. in physical chemistry, formerly in the military.
Yep.
Is that, holy cow, right? So it wasn't podcasts. What was creating this growth? Your background, tell me what the secret was. What's the catalyst?
One of the sad things about law firms is that they grow at a glacial pace, right? Most of our peers have been around for like 150 years. So unlike a fast growing technology company that's rapidly adapting new tech and implementing it quick and in a nimble way, law firms typically just take a long time to evolve, right? It's like and they're very risk averse, like an insurance company, right? And so we could make some very simple changes and be able to help facilitate our growth. So we focused on data science, using empirical data to drive better decisions for our clients. And I'm happy to get into that more.
No, but how did you get clients?
So my first clients that I had, I was working at a large law firm, and I wanted more entrepreneurial experience. I was going to take a job with another company in San Jose, but I had an opportunity to go work for myself, and I let one of the clients I'd been working with very closely at the firm where I was know that, and he offered to come with me, and if I go start my own business. And so that was what I did, is I took that opportunity to start my own business. 6 months later, we sold 13 of his patents and a portion of his business for $129 million. And so that was and then things really snowballed for me from there, because I had created a pathway of creating intellectual property, creating patents for companies that had real asset value, whether it was for like M&A, for like selling to another larger company.
Hold on, you're going way too fast.
Yeah. Sorry.
You're way too smart for me in the audience, I think. I mean, patents are usually public, right? So can you talk about who the company was?
Well, this particular inventor, his name, the company was called Rapid Manufacturing.
Okay.
And
what exactly did you patent for them?
they were, based in Nashua, New Hampshire, and we were patenting like digitizing manufacturing. So as you can imagine, like they're a machine shop, right? So imagine like making prototype parts at a machine shop, right?
Mhm.
And that all of that has been the same way for decades, right? With no digitization of that technology. And so what he did was create some software techniques to help automate some of those manufacturing processes.
Okay, and so those processes is what you patented.
That's right.
And
Yep.
did you do that in some kind of like systematic way where it was replicatable and you could scale it all over the place?
That
Like, what did you create some
he came
proprietary?
with that part, with the being able to scale how they were doing it and replicatable part. The part that we came with was the contemplating what was going to have the most value for potential buyers. And so we looked at a lot of the potential buyers, and we contemplated what they might need the most before we started drafting his patents. And then so that when we showed them to them, that they were like, oh yeah, we need this. And then we were able to drive a quick sale as a result.
Did you get a percentage of the sale, or were you just on a fixed fee basis?
No percentage, just humble.
Yeah.
Just
hey, that's a good accolade to put on your belt.
Yeah, exactly.
On your wall.
Yep.
So how did that notoriety create a windfall of clients? Like, was it the publicity of it? Did you get exposure to this industry that just flocked to you?
So there wasn't really a windfall of that right away, but the people that bought him then hired me, right?
Okay.
So the largest manufacturer of prototype parts in the world, a company called Proto Labs, they're 5,000 plus employees, offices all over the world. They then hired me to be their intellectual property counsel, and so I started to do their work, and then I opened an office my first office was in Burlington, Vermont. My second office that I ended up moving to was in Cambridge, Massachusetts, on MIT's campus. And as you can imagine, MIT and Harvard are really like a core center of innovation in the country.
Yep.
And I assumed correctly that even if I just had the scraps of what was left over work-wise, right, that I would do pretty well. And it turns out that was true, and we came up with a system for scaling things also.
So you get this big win from a previous client at a previous firm. You open an office in Cambridge. So, I mean, was it like, what were you doing in Cambridge to get the scraps per se? Like, what were you?
I gave talks. So we had a co-working space office, a one person office that we put two people in, and that was when I hired like the attorney that worked for me, and he and I flip-flopped, and we would give talks almost every week at networking events. Any opportunity that we had to give a talk at a networking event, we would do that. We also started to like partner with MIT and sponsor an organization that was attached to MIT, so that we could do co-branded events with the university. And then we got a lot of work that was spinning out, companies that were spinning out of MIT, that we started to do work for those people as well.
Man, that is smart.
And that really helped us a lot in the early days, was getting that work and having the co-branding with the university. And then I became, I started to host panels at MIT where then I would invite clients or prospective clients to come be on the panel, which they would likely want to do because they could get co-branding. It would substantiate whatever tech it was that they were developing to have the MIT platform. And then that helped even more because then we would make YouTube videos of everything, and then post that all up on our firm's YouTube channel, and have access for basically pushing out content that we felt like would have a lot of value to people that were curious about intellectual property, and access for companies to information that they wouldn't have otherwise. And then that helped result in a lot of extra business as well.
One of the most commanding sentences in the description your team sent over to me was that it says that you have experience advice. I'm going to read this verbatim. This really caught my attention. I hope people listening to this write this down. Somebody on your team sent this to me, and it says, Keegan has an extensive and diverse experience with advising clients from innovation conception to 9 and 10 figure monetization events. That's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
9 and 10 figure, that's powerful.
I'm humbled to be able to kind of state that claim as well. So we have, we work with a number of unicorn clients now, and we really have helped a lot of people grow from like that moment of conception to the moment of whatever their equity event is, right? So whether they're going to become a publicly traded entity, or they're being purchased by some larger company or private equity firm, or honestly, even just like raising money. Like right now we have some very exciting companies that are going through, large 9-figure funding rounds, and bringing in money. And we try to position the intellectual property in such a way that helps them be able to secure that money.
Have you thought about changing your revenue model where you get a percentage of the monetization event or something along those lines, or maybe potentially investing in some of these groups?
Yeah. So I get this question a lot. And when I first started the firm, and really even still now, I want to have like as much integrity as I can to my work. One of the things for lawyers is that we need to, whatever that we're involved in should not affect the decision-making for a client. And so if if there is that kind of incentive, that it maybe makes one client more important than another, and or that I would still have to be able to objectively treat them the same, even though I had a greater incentive, fiscal incentive for one, right? And so to be as impartial as possible and to try to treat people the same, I have not done that, but I do have opportunities to take equity. The firm has had opportunities to take equity in clients, and we have done that on occasion. But we have not, in like a formal sense of like if we're helping them accomplish some sort of objective, taking a specific percentage. We've not carved out anything like that. But it's a common question, and one that doesn't make sense to most people. But it has to do with ethical standards in as a lawyer.
When you reflect on these clients of yours that have, had 9 and 10 figure liquidity events, do you see any similarities in them? Like just objectively from an attorney being on the outside, looking at them as a business unit and the leadership team, do you see any patterns in these groups?
Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up one of the most exciting parts of my job is I get to have like a lens into each of these companies and get to see the 350 plus companies that we represent and how they operate. And definitely the commonalities with the folks that have the most success, I would say, are that they're organizations that operate with a lot of integrity. They're not up to any sort of unsavory business practices. They generally have like a collaborative spirit rather than a competitive one, so then rather than being like, oh, we need to edge out our competitor this way, we need to do this, they're more like, how is it that we're going to bring this technology to market, and how can we leverage some of the other people that are working on this too, maybe that we can accomplish this even faster, right? It's like Elon Musk and Tesla, right? Like, so Elon, he built the infrastructure needed for battery charging for the charging infrastructure for electrification of vehicles. And but that wasn't going to be possible without like a lot of collaboration. And he even made kind of famously a patent pledge saying, listen, you guys we're not going to sue anyone for IP unless there's any sort of bad actors or something like that. And at least for a portion of what their patents were. And that sort of collaborative, spirit of knowing that in order to bring a new technology to market and to have the sort of market penetration that you want, if you're the only person doing it and there's never a broader market adoption, then the technology is not likely to be that successful. And so since what I do is IP, and most of my clients are like these very tech-focused companies, and they need broad adoption of it. It helps if there's competitors, right? And so, collaboratively working with those folks is true. And then the other thing that I think that they have is they're very intentional about what it is that they're doing. They're not just going, well, I hope this works out, or, they know what the end point is usually, although keeping a few options open, and they're working towards that. And they have, and I think the last thing that I'd add is that the leadership of those companies, there's definitely some special qualities with those folks. And they have generally like a high level of emotional intelligence, and that allows them to create a company that has a morale that helps them accelerate fast, right? Like when you're building a unicorn type company, morale becomes more important than ever. And I never thought that at first, right? I thought it was just fluffy marketing or something like that. But I can tell you, having my own place now, that the morale of the folks here, it's very important for achieving not just our objectives, but those of our clients.
I know we have some listeners in the tech space that have founded various technology applications, and I'm thinking about a few of them actually in my head right now. And let's say, for example, you founded a tech platform. Let's say it's a CRM, and there's multiple CRMs out there. And maybe, this CRM you have is for a specific niche. And again, there's multiple CRMs in that niche. What would be an example of, something? I'd call out some very specific examples. So in the real estate space, the real estate brokerage space, there's a CRM called Follow Up Boss. Okay. There's another one called Boomtown, another one called Chime. It's actually become kind of saturated over the last 5 years, actually. And I know a couple of these guys that listen to the show that, and these companies do, 30 million, 40, 50 million a year in revenue. Yep. What would be examples for them to get something patented to try to, differentiate themselves in what's becoming a crowded space?
So the key is they probably already have some things that they're doing to distinguish themselves. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I think a common thing that folks run into, especially as they built an entity like the ones that you're talking about, is that you've been doing it for so long now and you know what's happening in the market. In your head, you're going, what I'm doing is not innovative. It's not something that's patentable, right? Right. And, usually right off the bat, we start to talk with people that the definition of what is and what is not patentable is carried out by, is set by a very specific set of rules, right? And it's often not whatever you think or whatever entrepreneur thinks is or is not patentable, right? And so those rules guide what's patentable, not our emotional response of what we think is innovative or not, right?
Is there some kind of like standard SOP, these rules you're referencing, when it comes to thinking about what's patentable, for someone to like go look up online before they call an attorney and waste their time?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that it shouldn't have been done in the public before, whenever they have conceived this thing, right? It doesn't necessarily need to be operating right now or anything like that. There's a lot of companies that just procure patent portfolios and file for patents that have never made the things that it is and maybe never will. But it has to be something that can be made, right? I think the key thing for the example that you're giving is that oftentimes innovation is necessarily known elements combined together in a new way, right? And sometimes for a new purpose. And that is usually where the innovation lies, right? So in the instance of talking about these CRM things, probably at some point they're using maybe some sort of new tool like a machine learning and applying it, maybe using some specific machine learning or AI tool is part of the filter or automation for the tool that it is that they've created, right? And if that's the case, then there's likely some potential that could be patentable, right? But one of the first steps is sorting out what is out there and is this something that's worth pursuing. We do that by a patentability search.
So just to challenge you on something, in the tech world, it seems like, innovation happens at such a rapid pace.
Yeah.
You could go get something patented and a year from now, that patent is like outdated and there's a new shiny object everybody needs to be jumping on. So
Maybe.
Why go get the patent?
Well, so this is a great question. So we're focused on the monetization value of a patent, right? So the average value of a patent in 2020 was $418,000 on the brokered market, right? So that's usually like when you're winding down a company or it's going out of business or something like that. Then you're going to sell off these assets to pay back your investors, right? So it's not the most ideal scenario, right? So the average price was $418,000.
Interesting.
So now they don't go, was this idea a good one or a bad one in that process, I guess is what I'm getting at, right?
Yeah.
Now, no, that's like on a curve, right? Where like that's the average. At the high end, it's like the max of that is like $1.2 million. And then the minimum on that was like around $40,000, right? So even with that being the case, like, so there's a real value to an intangible asset, right? Like IP is an intangible asset for a company, and there's a real value associated with that. It's generally multiples more than whatever investment that they've made in it, and it doesn't, listen, there's definitely some IP that's more valuable than others, but in technology does change very quickly. But the value of the IP is generally in that are other people adopting it. So if you've made something and maybe technology changes and they're starting to adapt to take on the latest, greatest thing, there's still going to be several other companies, most likely, there could be, that are still using that thing that you had patented before. And that's actually a very useful scenario because the value of a patent is often driven by market adoption. So, if you just have a patent on something that no one ever uses, right, then that's not particularly useful. Then you just have a very expensive piece of paper.
So So you're saying the mechanism that, or the light bulb that should go off in an entrepreneur's head is when you have something that is being adopted and it's something unique you're offering, that is when you should consider getting it patented so your competitors can't go and copy it.
That is one aspect of it. What you're granted is the ability to stop. When you get a patent, you're granted a 20-year monopoly on that technology, and you have the ability to stop others from performing whatever it is that you have patented, right? And so that it's the liability that it creates for those other companies that it's the value. And so yes, if let me put it this way, I think that every company, whether or not they choose to pursue a patent or a trademark or copyright protection, should have an IP strategy. Every growing company should have an IP strategy. That's what I feel. And I think that that's like the S&P 500, for instance, in the 1970s was largely made up of tangible assets. Like more than 80% of it was tangible assets. Now, in 2021, of the S&P 500 companies, over 80% of the value of companies is made up of intangible assets. Google, Apple, Facebook, all these companies, it's their intangibles. And, IBM, whoever, GE, and all of them have, not all of these companies, but a lot of them, IBM, GE, and others have very complex patent licensing programs that they have set. Now, these are massive entities, right? Like, how does that relate to a startup? Well, you're still able to distinguish yourself. And it really becomes part of the overarching story, I think, for companies that we work with. If you have a technology, let's say that you're one of these. This actually, I'll go back to your example with the real estate companies. I love this one. So let's say that you're Chime, and then there's the other, whatever the other one is, and so your real estate CRM 1 or real estate CRM 2, they're like a SaaS service. One SaaS company has IP, one SaaS doesn't. Which one's worth more? Right? The one with the IP all day long, most likely, right? And even like when companies go public, companies that there's, published data that shows that companies that go public have a 13.8% higher stock price than companies that don't. So if you have like $1 billion, public offering, now you're talking about over 9 figures has been added by the value.
I definitely see from a differentiation marketing perspective, how that could help, ease the mind of an investor.
Yeah, I mean, because you're dissolving liability for them too, right? Because you're saying, listen, we're a technology company. And then not only are you saying, instead of just being like, oh, we've got some great tech, well, was it important enough to protect? If you were as important enough for you to protect, then you're really a technology company, right? And you can use that as part of your story, right? Like we have a robust patent strategy, or we have, whatever. But if you don't, then you also have danger, potential danger, because then maybe you're opening up yourself to, maybe you're infringing someone else's IP, right? And then you don't have any of your own to protect the things that it is that you're creating.
And another scenario question for you.
Sure.
So let's say you've got 2 companies. They're both software companies.
Yep.
And they do similar things. And the one company is like, they come to you, Keegan, and they're like, hey, I want to go patent our technology. And then after it, I want to go have an attorney send a letter to our competitor saying you're infringing on our patent. Is that a realistic, use case for going to get a patent to try to take market share from a competitor?
What people often do is use it as like kind of a moat to protect the area in which that it is that they're innovating. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so it might not be anything that they're going to create, but they want to keep all the one-offs, from the technology that they're creating, of the patents that they're creating as well, keep people as far away from their space as possible, right? And certainly, we see that regularly as a strategy to, kind of box out competitors, using the IP to create a market advantage, certainly.
I mean, I've heard stories about how Google has these patents and then they go file $100 million or $1 billion lawsuit against Microsoft Bing, right? Saying like, hey, you're infringing on this, but they were both already kind of doing it, right? But it seems like Google got the patent before, and then like they're trying to make them basically shut down some feature that is causing user adoption that they probably were both already doing.
Yeah, at the highest level with these massive cases that you're, talking about, in those cases can go on for like 10 years. And there is a lot of positioning with those sort of things, like strategic positioning, right? But, at the end of the day, for a Google or for a Microsoft or whoever, there's still the same rules that apply to the single inventor, right? That there's this patent that they have a monopoly on, whatever's been granted, and that they can enforce this against someone else. And the stronger case that they have for that, right? Like the more reliable their case for infringement is, then the more liability then that's going to create for that other entity. A lot of times these things are settled with some sort of, backroom conversation that could be collaborative, or some sort of monetary settlement that makes one of the parties whole for whatever they felt like they were losing as a result of the potential infringement, right? So it's
seems like you could spend a lot of money on trying to enforce patents on the back end.
Yes, and there's a whole business
from infringing. Yeah.
There's just like there's venture capitalists that fund companies, there's venture capitalists that fund litigations.
Yep, I've heard about that. Yeah.
Or companies, yeah. The litigation finance. It's a whole area of private equity where they see an opportunity. They go, all right, company, someone's infringing your IP. They'll investigate how strong that case for infringement is. And then if they feel like there's a good chance of them winning and that the numbers make sense, the amount of money that they would make, then they might fund that, because litigations can get quite expensive, into the millions of dollars quickly. And so they saw an area to monetize that and to create some opportunity for companies that maybe couldn't afford to compete against the Google, Apple, Facebooks, et cetera, of the world also.
For people that are listening right now that are inventors and thinking about calling you to get something patented, what's the low end and high end range to start that process? from a cost
So,
perspective?
Yeah, certainly, it varies, across region to region and market to market, right? But our fees at our firm are generally between $10,000 and $15,000 for filing a non-provisional patent application, right? And but we're not the cheapest guys. We're not the most expensive guys. There's firms out there that charge $50,000 for a patent application, and then there's firms out there that I think that charge, five, but I would say probably like the average, this is an educated guess, definitely,
Yeah.
Is like, whether it's our firm or someone else, is probably around the $10,000 mark, 10 to 15K.
So that gets everything done, or there's additional stuff to be done after that first 10 to 15K?
After that, then there's going to be some arguing with the patent office usually, right? So you're going to file that. Once you file that to the patent office, there's a patent examiner there that will look it over. And then generally like 90, maybe 99% of the time, the patent office says no, and they issue you a rejection with their reasons for rejection. And then we have to argue with them. And then when that happens, which is usually a couple of years after you file for a patent, or it can be, within 6 months, even if you do a special program. But, so it's at least 6 months later, if not a couple of years later, that you get these rejections from the patent office. And then for every one of those, we have to argue with them. And then that might cost a few $1,000s also.
I'm trying to wrap my head around, if I don't want to dumb down technology, but there's certain use cases. There's certain use cases in technology where, like for example, the algorithm that Google has, like,
Yes.
Of course needs to be patented, right? But it's like, when you think about like writing code for software, a lot of it is replicatable to a certain degree. And so I don't know, I guess, I'm so jaded because I feel like technology gets, just outdated so quickly. It's like, why spend the money on patenting something? Because it just, in a year, it's going to be outdated.
There's some different philosophies regarding IP, right? But
I understand the use cases for monetization, like, trying to differentiate yourself from a marketing perspective, investment perspective.
Yep.
So I see the use cases for that. But, if you're just purely trying to do it from, get additional market share and keep competitors away, well, whatever you're patented could be outdated in a year pretty easily. So,
yeah, but then the alternative, I guess, to play the devil's advocate, right, is that what's the alternative of that, right? That now maybe you have competitors that have patents, right? And that they can come and sue you and you don't have anything to countersue, right? Generally, if someone was working on technology in this scenario that I'm describing, this is a common one, where if there was a client that came to me and was, had a list of potential infringers that they had identified.
I want to give you an exact example of something I'm personally involved in.
Yeah, sure.
Because I can speak to a lot of specifics, technology related.
Yep.
So I invested and I sit on the board of a integration platform. It's a web-based integration platform. So it basically builds connectors to a software application and then builds another connector to another software application.
Okay.
And it's like middleware, creates a bi-directional integration, and it maps data from one independent application to the other. And you could have a source point for data from application A and a target point on application B, and then vice versa, B to A, to make the applications speak to one another, right?
Yep.
And so middleware has been around for a while. Granted, the one I'm invested in is specific to the real estate industry, integrating, dozens of different software applications. And, I'm just like thinking through my head, like, okay, when I call Keegan to go get a patent on this, we have all the market share in the space. We're the most well-known, have the most customers. And the runner-up is really far behind us. And so I was thinking, okay, well, what if they go get a patent and then send us, and then they send an attorney a letter to us, saying, hey, you're infringing on our patent.
Then you're the easy target.
Yeah.
Because if you were doing something and they were, so this is the scenario that I was just getting ready to describe, right? Is that if there was some potential infringers that a client came to us with, and then some of them had patents and some of them didn't, who would we go after first?
Yeah.
The guys that didn't have patents, right? Because if the folks that have patents, there might be the opportunity for them to countersue, right? Because if we're working on similar technologies and they also have IP, maybe there's the potential that we're also infringing some of their IP, and they might be able to make some sort of reasonable claim to that, right? So the easy targets are folks that don't have anything, and I totally appreciate what you're saying. Like it definitely, one of the hard things for me when I first started the firm was telling people whether or not they should get protection or not, right? Or what my opinion was about that, because I don't think that every company needs it. But that's what I mean when like every company needs an IP strategy, though, is that we might not need it today, maybe we need it later down the road. But either way, if we don't need it, then we're keeping those things as trade secrets, and we should document those things, right? So that they're ours. And all of those things build value for the company, whether or not they're protecting an aspect of the R&D or the tools that you have at your company. There's still something that's building value for the company either way, and building it in a way that adds a multiple in general that has an ROI from whatever the investment was. And so, but to get back to your question, yes, technology changes all the time, but not as fast as you think, right? I mean, when did you first hear about the metaverse?
Yeah, a year ago.
A year ago, people still talking about it. Do you hang out there a lot?
No,
exactly. But maybe in a few years, right? You will.
Yeah.
People have been talking about it for a long time. Do you think people, the people that probably have IP in that space and that are procuring it now might likely have some very valuable IP down the road? Or like when we were talking, the early adopters of blockchain in 2015, 2016, right? And I used to give a lot of talks about this sort of technology that is something that has evolved a lot, right? But there's also thousands of patents out there and the different adaptations of that particular technology. And that's kind of similar to your example of the middleware technology. Yeah. Middleware exists, but we're using it for a different purpose. We're solving a specific problem in a specific area of industry by using it, in this way. Using known.
I'm thinking like from an entrepreneur, I'm putting on my entrepreneurial hat and I'm thinking like, okay, I'm a competitor to RealSync, the company I'm invested in. And these guys have a patent. Well, what if I just created a slight deviation from the patent, right? Am I infringing on the patent? Like what, how much do you have to differentiate yourself to ensure you're not infringing on a patent, I guess?
That's probably a question for another podcast, but it's because I think it's very situational, like a patient presents to operating room 3 years old with a broken bone, or to the emergency room, what do we do, right? If it's you or, a small person or an old person, it's very different scenarios, for each of them. And in your specific scenario, like the way that patent infringement is defined, you have to figure out whether or not you were or were not infringing at first, and then make some reasonable decisions following up on that. Or you could, the patent system initially, when it was created, was so that others could see what other people were working on, that we could build upon that, right? So that we could, for the exact purpose that you're kind of describing, right? That we could become a more industrious nation. And that was the original intent of the patent system when it came out, was that that's what we would do. Now, I think that it's strayed a little bit from that, because then you go from having this sort of collaborative, oh, well, that's great, now I can build upon this and make this better, to I'm going to take what it is that you had, I'm going to sprinkle on something maybe negligible difference is the scenario you're describing, and then I'm going to go sue a bunch of people or something like that from there, right? And I think that, in those things that, we see those things happen, right? The U.S. patent system is not perfect. But it does have a lot of utility, though, and it builds value for companies either way, right? Like I said, I love the SaaS example. Like you have a SaaS company that has patents, and another one that doesn't. They do the exact same thing. The one with patents likely gets way more money for it when they sell.
I want to change gears for a minute. You got your Ph.D. in physical chemistry. How did you go from that to law? And also And my other random question I have for you is: you were in the Marines. Thank you for your service, by the way.
Yep.
And what was your role in the Marines? Those are my two abstract questions as I was learning more about you.
Yeah. So I was in when I got done with high school, I joined the Marine Corps, and then, like you said, after that, I ended up using my GI Bill, and I had actually like a challenging process in between when I got out of the Marines. Had some substance abuse issues that like I was like embattled with and addressed, and I got into a lot of legal trouble, and got squared some things away in my life, and then ultimately ended up going to school for a long time, and I'll tell you about some of that journey. But in the Marine Corps, I was an engineer, and then went from doing that to when I got out of the service, I still had this entrepreneurial sort of bug, and I worked basically. I started, building homes and building. I had like a small construction business that I grew up. My dad was, jack of all trades, and so I knew a little bit about those things. Was comfortable doing that, and I started a business with a friend of mine, and he and I started a business in Virginia. We did that for a couple of years, but then I was, again, just with drinking and drugs, like was just having like some real issues, and so eventually decided to get help for those things, and then I started school in 2006. Started my bachelor's, and I was 26 years old then, and I hadn't been to school in like 8 years, maybe even 9 years at that point, and I really had no plans of going to college or anything like that. My grandmother said, there's one thing that people can't take away from you is if you go to college, so she was like, get your stuff together and stop going to jail and go do something more with your life. It seemed like reasonable advice.
Yeah.
Thank you, Grandma. And so I made some major changes in my life, addressed those issues, and went back to school. I started off, my undergrad's in biomedical science, and I thought that I'd be a dentist, right? So my grandfather was a dentist. I had an uncle and some cousins that were dentists, and that seemed like they were the most successful people I knew, right? And so I was like, well, let me get involved with that. And I didn't even know about career paths like my own. I don't think most children grow up being like, I'm going to grow up and be a patent attorney, right? Like, I don't think. And so I did that. And then I thought I was going to go to dental school, but then was doing some research when I was an undergrad and in a chemistry lab. And the guy that I was working for said, hey, you should maybe think about getting a Ph.D. Since I was an older student, getting a Ph.D. Meant that I wasn't going to go into debt, and I'd actually get paid a little bit of money to get a Ph.D. And where I'd go several $100,000 in debt to do dental school. And so I made, kind of a strategic call that I wanted to that I would get a Ph.D. at that point. And so I got my PhD in physical chemistry, which had nothing to do with the biology degree I had earlier. And it was really hard because it was math intensive. It's basically physics, but I had a wonderful experience. I went to George Washington University in Washington, D.C. And then while I was doing that, I did an internship at the United States Patent and Trademark Office and got like a flavor for that, something that I wanted to do. And but I didn't want to work there. And so I wanted to, get into private practice. And so I got done. I took the patent bar. When I graduated with my PhD, you could take the patent bar without going to law school. And so I did that. And then, which means that you can, federally practice patent law, but just patent law in front of the patent office. Right. And so I did that, but I still wanted to become, a lawyer. And so I wanted to take a state bar, and it turns out that, the states of California, Vermont, Virginia, and a couple others that you can take the bar there without going to law school. And so I figured that out and ended up taking a state bar without going to law school, where I could read the law like Kim Kardashian or, Abe Lincoln.
Hold on. So you don't have to go to law school to be a lawyer I'm looking at the states you're licensed in. Massachusetts, California, and UK?
Oh, in the UK. Well, I don't have a license in the UK, but I mean, there's attorneys that work
You
for
have an
me.
office there? Yeah.
Yeah, people that work for me do. Yeah, there's someone here that does. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. But so in the US, it's Massachusetts and California?
Yeah, but in California, in Massachusetts doesn't allow people to read the law here, but Vermont and California do.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you basically just got a bunch of books so you could study for the bar.
Yeah, there's each state has its own specific requirements, but in general for Vermont and California, it's like a 4-year apprenticeship program where you're like working at a law firm and kind of studying as you go, and then eventually you just take the bar. Yeah.
Did your and
It's really uncommon. It's not if there's my take home advice, some take home advice from this podcast is probably don't do that, right?
Okay.
It worked out well for me. But for most people, you would have a lot of trouble getting a job.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, I mean, like everyone that works for me, for instance, we have people that went, had people that work for me that went to Harvard to, well, all sorts of law schools. So, but everyone here went to law school except for me. I'm the only one that can practice law that didn't go to law school.
What caused you to go open an office in Santa Monica and London?
So,
was it the businesses you were partnered with demanded it, or how did that come about?
Not really, no. I wanted like strategic placement to create an international presence, right? An international firm. And like if I was living in Europe or somewhere else in the world, when I think about the United States, Boston isn't at the top of the list of the major cities that I would think about, right? It's like New York, LA, maybe Miami, right?
Yeah.
And so I wanted to open an office in LA, went to LA, looked at offices out there. Most of the law firms were in this either downtown or in Century City, this kind of area on the west side. And but then there was some tech firms that I consider to be peers that had opened offices in Santa Monica near the beach, which they call Silicon Beach. And so we decided to open an office there, and that's worked out quite well. I mean, we do have clients in that area, but the bigger thing is being in a global city.
Was the thought process similar to what you did in Boston, just, being close to Harvard and MIT? Is that similar thought process for?
Similar, but a little bit different. So I knew that there was a lot of technology stuff happening. I think that the LA decision was more based on that it was a global financial market. And in order to grow to the next level and to get work with larger institutional clients, that we would need to be in that market.
I think the biggest nugget you've dropped over the last 50 minutes is how valuable partnering with a, outside credible institution, how that can help propel your growth through affiliation, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, they've been great. I will say too, I mean, just a plug for the university, like MIT's the bomb, right? Like they've been, like their collaborative approach, right? It really does drive innovation, right? Like they're here to help people succeed, and not all universities have that feeling or that culture of that, but they promote that. They want to give back to their community and to create as much opportunity as they can for their students, which makes a lot of sense. But and it's been great for us as well.
Cool. Man, this has been a great podcast. Let's close it out. What is the most exciting thing you see somebody inventing right now that's a client of yours?
Oh, that's easy.
Well, the most game-changing thing where you're like, oh my God, this is going to change the world.
I have a client called Beta Technologies. Beta.team is their web domain, and they make electric vertical takeoff, vertical landing aircraft. And they're electrifying air transport. They make flying machines. They're making, clean energy flying machines. And I believe that they'll fundamentally change aerospace over the next 10 years.
I'm at this website, beta.team. I'm willing to bet these guys came out of MIT.
No.
No,
that's what's so cool. These guys are of Vermont. They're based in Vermont, which makes them even more unique, right? And they've been growing rapidly over the last 5 years. They've had a lot of successes with their growth. And right now they're just working towards finalizing their certification with the FAA. But they've done quite well. And I think that they'll be recognized as a leader of their industry if they're not already soon.
Wow. electric vertical aircraft.
Yeah. So that's where you can kind of, take off from a hospital, off you go, right? Take off. And they just did a cross country flight from Burlington, Vermont to Northwest Arkansas which might be one of the longest, if not the longest, electric flights that there've been. And but I don't know that. Don't quote me on that. But that they're very excited. It's cool. We work with a lot of people that make a lot of interesting things, and a lot of companies that are bigger and that are smaller than they are. But they just make really cool stuff, and they have a wonderful culture. I'm very excited about them. Yeah.
It looks like a hybrid of a plane and a helicopter.
Yeah. Yeah. It's exactly what it is. It's exactly what it is.
Wow. Yeah, super cool.
Future of electric transport. I'm going to add real quick too. This is the lawyer in me. None of this is legal advice, but it was great to be on the podcast today. Thanks, Chris, for having me. I really appreciate it.
Keegan, thanks for being on, man. This has been good. I might be hitting you up for some services on the patent side.
I'm happy to chat.
Yeah.
We'll figure it out if it's worthwhile or not.
Yeah, sounds good. Where? What's your website? Where can people go to reach out to find?
You guys can check us out on CaldwellIP.com.
Caldwell.ip.
Yep, CaldwellIP.com.
Okay, and I'll put that in the show notes. Guys, thanks for you guys listening. Thanks for tuning in to CEO Secrets. I think Keegan dropped a nice little nugget on us today. And this stuff on IP is fascinating. You're our first guest out of the
cool.
Our first guest in this arena. We've interviewed, obviously, I've interviewed, over 100 of the top 500 Inc. 500 folks. And this is our first one having somebody both in the Inc. 500 list and that specializes in IP. So this has been awesome. Keegan, thanks so much for being on today.
Thanks, Chris. Take care, man. We'll see you.
All right, guys, hit that subscribe button and we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.